My wife lied about meeting a life coach, but when I put a GPS tracker and caught them at a motel, she broke down and revealed who he really was. Hey everyone! I never thought I'd be the one posting in a subreddit like this, but I guess life has a way of throwing you curveballs. I'm Jim, 42M, and I've been married to Amy, 37F, for 12 years. We've got 2 kids, ages 9 and 6. Until recently, I would have told you that we had a solid marriage. Not perfect, but whose is? I work long hours in construction management, and Amy is a freelance writer, which means she's home a lot and has a flexible schedule. It always seemed to work for us, but the last few months have been rough. Amy's been different, and I'm not talking about a little mood swing here or there. It started with small things. She'd get irritated with me over nothing, snap at the kids for things she'd usually laugh off. When I tried to ask her what was going on, she'd give vague answers like, "I'm just stressed with work," or "I need more time to myself." I thought it was burnout from the freelancing gig, so I encouraged her to take more breaks or join a local book club. She appreciated the gestures, but they didn't seem to make a difference. Then she started going out more. At first, it was I'm meeting a client at the cafe or I need to work somewhere quiet, but these outings became more frequent. She'd be gone for hours, and when she'd return, it was like I wasn't even there. She'd lock herself in her office and write for what seemed like days on end. Our conversations became surface level, and she stopped asking me about my day, something she'd always done. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was off. I wanted to believe that it was just a phase. Maybe she was going through a midlife crisis or something. But the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. I started noticing patterns. On certain days, she'd dress up more, spend extra time on her hair and makeup, even though she said she was just going to the local coffee shop to write. One time, I remember she left the house smelling like perfume, and when I asked her why she was dressed up for a cafe, she snapped, "Can I just want to feel good about myself for a change?" That stung, and it shut me up. The first real clue that something was seriously wrong came one afternoon when I was scrolling through some old photos on our shared laptop. A notification from her backup email popped up in the corner of the screen. It was from a cafe she supposedly rarely visited. It looked like a reservation confirmation. My heart started racing. I knew I shouldn't snoop, but I clicked on it anyway. The email thread revealed a series of transactions, coffee, lunch, and private booth reservations on days she'd told me she was too swamped with work to even eat. Some of the receipts were marked 2 guests. My mind went blank for a second. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. When she got home, I casually brought it up, pretending I saw the cafe's name by accident. Her reaction was instant defensiveness. She said it was just a convenient place to get some writing done, but she'd also met with a few clients there, and that's why the receipts mentioned 2 guests. Her explanation sounded rehearsed, and I remember thinking, why would a freelance writer need to meet clients at a cafe so often? Something wasn't adding up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those email receipts and wondered who she was meeting. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went online and ordered a small GPS tracker and a voice-activated recorder. I know, it's not something I'm proud of, but I needed answers. I felt like I was going crazy. If she was telling the truth, I'd feel guilty for not trusting her. But if she was lying, I installed the GPS tracker in her car the weekend when she was out running errands. I also placed the voice recorder in her office. It was a little USB stick, the kind you can just leave plugged into a laptop. I figured it'd pick up enough to give me an idea of what was going on. Nothing invasive, just something to prove or disprove my suspicions. It didn't take long to get results. The first few days were uneventful. She mostly drove to the grocery store, dropped the kids off at their activities, and stayed home. But then, on a Wednesday, she left for one of her work sessions at the cafe. I watched her GPS ping at a new location, not the cafe. She had driven to the outskirts of town, to a small motel off the highway. I stared at the screen, willing it to be a mistake, but the tracker stayed put. She was there for over 3 hours. I told myself that it could still be nothing. Maybe she was meeting a client or a friend, but my mind was already racing with worst-case scenarios. That evening, I waited for her to say something, anything. But she walked in the door like it was just another ordinary day and went straight to her office to work. I felt sick. When I finally listened to the voice recorded the next morning, I heard it. A man's voice in her office, soft but clear. He was calling her by a nickname I'd never heard before, something intimate like sweetheart or baby. My whole body went numb. I played the recording over and over, trying to convince myself I was hearing it wrong. I was losing my mind, and I knew I had to confront her. But I didn't want to do it while the kids were around. They didn't deserve to see whatever was about to happen. So I waited until the weekend. I waited until Saturday afternoon, when the kids were at their grandparents' place. Amy was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd been planning this confrontation all week. My hands were sweating, and I could feel my heart pounding against my chest. I needed to stay calm, but my mind was screaming. "Amy, we need to talk," I said, trying to sound as neutral as possible. She looked up, and for a split second, I saw something in her eyes, not fear, but annoyance, like I was bothering her. It was enough to throw me off balance, but I pushed through. "What is it, Jim?" she asked, putting her phone down and crossing her arms. "If it's about me going out again to write, I already told you I need some space." "No, it's not about that." I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. "I need to show you something." Her eyes narrowed as I opened the recording app and played the audio file. I watched her face closely. As soon as she heard the man's voice, she stiffened. She didn't say anything, just stared at me like I'd caught her with a hand in the cookie jar. "Who is he, Amy?" I demanded, keeping my voice steady. "Don't tell me this is just some client." For a moment, she didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at me. And then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was more like a short, mocking chuckle, the kind that says, "You're such an idiot." "Oh, Jim, really?" she said, shaking her head. "You think I'm having an affair because of some stupid recording? This is a private conversation, and you're invading my space. How did you even get this? Are you spying on me now?" I felt my face flush with anger. "Don't turn this around on me, Amy. I want answers. Why is a man calling you sweetheart in our house? What were you doing at that motel on Wednesday?" Her eyes widened at the mention of the motel. She looked taken aback for a moment, but quickly composed herself. "A motel," she scoffed. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Jim." But I could see her defenses cracking. She was blinking too much, her hands fidgeting at her sides. I had her cornered, and she knew it. I pulled up the GPS tracker data and shoved my phone in front of her. "This is where you were, Amy. Don't try to lie to me. I know you were there." For a moment, she was silent, and then she exhaled sharply, like she was releasing all the tension in her body. "Fine, Jim. If you must know, I was meeting someone," she said, crossing her arms again, but this time with more confidence. "But it's not what you think. He's a life coach. I've been going through a lot, okay? You're never here, and I feel like I'm losing myself. So I needed someone to talk to. A life coach," I repeated, incredulous. "You're paying some guy to call you sweetheart and meet you at motels?" "I wasn't at a motel," she yelled, suddenly on her feet. "I'm not cheating on you, Jim. I just needed help." "Is that so hard to believe? Then why lie about it?" I shot back. "Why hide this from me if it's so innocent?" She paused, struggling to find the right words. "Because I knew you'd react like this," she finally burst out. "You'd overreact and make it into something it's not. I wanted to figure things out on my own, without you hovering over me or accusing me of God knows what. I stood there, staring at her, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. The woman in front of me wasn't the Amy I knew. My Amy would have come to me if she was struggling, wouldn't she? She wouldn't lie or go behind my back like this, right? The uncertainty must have shown on my face because her expression softened, and she reached out to touch my arm. Jim, I'm sorry. I should have told you, but I didn't know how. I felt so alone, and I needed someone to talk to. Her touch burned like ice. I pulled away, shaking my head. I don't believe you, I said quietly. You've been hiding things for months. You're lying now. There's no way this is just a life coach. I want the truth, Amy. Her face twisted with frustration. I am telling the truth. I'm not cheating, Jim. I haven't done anything with him. I needed someone who understood what I was going through. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice calm. Then prove it. Tell me his name. Show me your conversations. Let me see this life coach of yours. For a moment, I thought she might actually do it, but then she shook her head, taking a step back. No, I'm not going to let you dig through my personal life. I have a right to my privacy, even from you. Privacy? I echoed, my voice rising. You're my wife, Amy. This is our marriage. There shouldn't be any secrets between us. You know that. You're not my father, Jim, she snapped, eyes flashing. I don't have to explain every little thing I do to you. Her defiance stunned me. I had expected tears, apologies, maybe even some kind of breakdown. But this was something else entirely. It felt like she was daring me to push her further, to do something drastic. But I couldn't back down. Not now. So you're really not going to tell me? I asked, my voice steady, but icy. You're really going to keep lying even now? She crossed her arms again, her jaw set. I've told you everything I'm going to say. If you don't believe me, then that's your problem, not mine. Something inside me snapped. Fine. Then I'll find out the truth myself. And when I do, we're done. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the middle of the kitchen. I didn't want to look back, didn't want to see if she was crying or just glaring at me with that same cold, detached expression. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was going to get the truth, no matter what it took. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see her face, the way she'd stood there, arms crossed, daring me to push her further. It was like she didn't even care that I was falling apart. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even scared. That's what hurt the most, seeing her so indifferent. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from our conversation. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really was just talking to someone, trying to work through some feelings. But that wasn't the woman I knew. The Amy I married would have told me if she felt lost or confused. She would have come to me first, not some random guy she had to meet in secret. The next morning, I knew I had to take things a step further. I needed to know who this man was. She refused to tell me, but that didn't mean I couldn't find out on my own. I decided to look at her computer, the one she kept in her office. She was out picking up the kids from their sleepover at her parents' house, so I had at least an hour. My heart was pounding as I sat at her desk, her screen glowing in front of me. There were hundreds of files, documents, and notes from her freelance work. I wasn't even sure where to begin. But then I saw something strange. A folder labeled personal. I clicked it open, expecting to see more of her writing projects. Instead, it was full of photos and videos I had never seen before. Selfies of her at cafes, smiling in places she'd never mentioned going to. Pictures of her in different outfits that I hadn't seen in our closet. But the real kicker was a folder within the folder, titled Jeremy, I felt a cold chill run down my spine as I opened it. There he was, a man in his early 40s, tall, with dark hair and a smile that seemed to mock me through the screen. There were pictures of him and Amy sitting at a cafe walking down the street, and even one of them standing way too close, their faces inches apart. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through picture after picture, each one feeling like a knife being driven deeper into my chest. My phone buzzed on the desk, snapping me out of my trance. It was a message from Amy on our way back. Be home in 20. I had to act fast. I copied the entire folder onto a flash drive, then shut down the computer, making sure everything looked exactly as it had before. My head was spinning. I knew who he was now, but I still didn't know what he was to her. Was he really just a friend, an old high school buddy like she said, or was this something more? The flash drive felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket as I waited for her to get home. When she walked through the door with the kids, she was all smiles, acting like nothing had happened the day before. I forced myself to smile back, to act normal, but I couldn't look at her the same way. I couldn't stop thinking about Jeremy and all the things she hadn't told me. Over the next few days, I did more digging. I looked up Jeremy online, scrolling through his social media profiles and piecing together his life. He was single, never married, no kids. He lived only a few towns over. And guess what? He was a self-proclaimed life coach. His profile was full of posts about helping people find themselves and unlocking your potential. It made me sick just reading it. One evening, I decided to confront her again. Not with accusations, but with what I'd found. I wanted to see how she'd react if I brought up Jeremy's name, casually slipping it into the conversation. So, I said, as we sat down for dinner after putting the kids to bed, I was thinking we should have some people over for a barbecue. Maybe invite some friends. What about that Jeremy guy you've been meeting? You've mentioned him before, right? Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes widening just for a fraction of a second before she caught herself. Jeremy, she repeated slowly, setting down her fork. Why would we invite him? I don't really know him that well. I kept my face neutral, pretending not to notice her sudden discomfort. I thought you two were getting pretty close with all those life coaching sessions you've been having. Her expression shifted from surprise to something sharper, almost hostile. Jim, what's this about? I told you, he's just someone I talk to when I need to sort things out. I don't even see him that often. Really? I tilted my head, looking at her with what I hoped was genuine curiosity. Then why did you two meet at that cafe so many times? And the pictures, it seemed like you two were really hitting it off. Her face drained of color. She was caught, and she knew it. But instead of breaking down or apologizing, she straightened up in her chair, eyes blazing. Were you snooping through my things? She demanded, her voice rising. Are you seriously spying on me, Jim? This is insane. Don't try to turn this around on me, Amy. I shot back, my voice steady. I wouldn't have had to do any of this if you'd just been honest with me. So, how about you start now? Who is he really? She looked away, her jaw clenched. He's an old friend. From high school, she muttered, barely audible. And why did you lie about it? I pressed. Why did you make up that life coach story? Because I knew you'd overreact, she exploded, her voice echoing in the quiet dining room. I knew you'd accuse me of something I haven't done, just because I wanted to catch up with an old friend. Is that a crime now? My head was spinning. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was she telling the truth, or was this just another one of her lies? I'm done talking about this, she snapped, getting up from the table and storming out of the room. You're paranoid, Jim. You're pushing me away with all these accusations. I sat there alone, staring at her empty chair. The flash drive was still in my pocket, the evidence burning like a hot coal against my leg. I could confront her with it, show her that I knew everything. But what good would it do? She was never going to tell me the truth on her own. The following week was excruciating. Amy barely spoke to me and I did my best to keep up appearances for the kids. We'd managed to avoid any direct confrontation, but the tension was there, thick and suffocating, like a storm cloud hovering over our house. Every time I glanced at her, I saw those pictures of her and Jeremy flash through my mind. I kept wondering if she was still seeing him, still lying about where she went during her work hours. I needed more answers. The photos and GPS tracker data weren't enough. I needed something irrefutable, something that would force her to admit the truth. So I decided to take it up a notch. The next day, I called in sick and took the day off work. I told Amy I was staying home to rest, but she seemed indifferent. She barely looked up from her laptop when I said goodbye to the kids and closed myself in our bedroom. I waited until she left for her writing session at noon, this time telling me she was going to a library across town. After she was gone, I did something I wasn't proud of. I picked up the voice recorder I'd left in her office and connected it to my laptop. I skimmed through hours of silence, mundane typing sounds, and the occasional phone call to a friend or family member. But then, at around 3 p.m., her voice changed. It became softer, warmer. She wasn't talking like a woman working on a freelance project. She was talking like someone in love. The man's voice that replied was unmistakable. It was Jeremy. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, my heart hammering as I listened. They were talking about mundane things at first, books, movies, and people they used to know. But then the conversation shifted, and I could hear the affection seeping into their words. Amy laughed softly at something he said, and then he told her he missed her. "I miss you too," she whispered back, and my heart sank. "Can we meet again soon?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. "I can't stop thinking about you, Amy." "I don't know," she murmured, sounding conflicted. "It's getting harder to get away. Jim's been suspicious lately. He's been asking questions, so..." Jeremy's voice hardened a bit. "You said yourself you're not happy with him anymore. You deserve more. You deserve to be with someone who really sees you." "I know, but it's complicated," Amy sighed. "I don't want to hurt the kids. And Jim, he's not a bad guy. I don't know what to do." My stomach churned. I could barely breathe as I listened to them dance around the reality of what they were doing. It wasn't just a flirtation or some emotional fling. This was real. It had weight. I wanted to throw the laptop across the room, to smash the headphones and scream, but I forced myself to keep listening. "Don't you think he'll figure it out eventually?" Jeremy asked softly. "I mean, we can't keep sneaking around like this forever. You're unhappy. I'm ready whenever you are. Jeremy, please." "I need more time," Amy said, and I could hear the strain in her voice. "Just give me some more time to figure things out." "More time? To what? To leave me?" My whole body was trembling as I unplugged the recorder. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. She was considering it, leaving our family, blowing up everything we'd built together for this guy. That night, I couldn't even look at her. I had to know more before I confronted her again. I needed to be sure. I wanted her to know that I knew, that I had the proof, and that there was no way out for her. So I did something even worse. I made a copy of the recording and sent it to a private investigator I'd found online. His name was Mark, a former cop who now specialized in marital infidelity cases. I explained the situation to him briefly over the phone, feeling my throat tighten with every word. "I don't just want confirmation," I told him. "I want everything, pictures, dates, everything. I need to know how deep this goes." "Understood," Mark said, his voice calm and professional. "I'll start tailing her tomorrow. Shouldn't take long to get you what you need." The guilt was overwhelming. I knew I was crossing a line, but after what I'd heard on that recording, I couldn't stop myself. I needed this to be over. I needed to know the whole truth. Over the next few days, I went through the motions at work and at home, feeling like I was living in a daze. Amy continued with her routine, acting as if nothing had changed. But every time she left the house, I checked in with Mark, who sent me updates throughout the day. Each message chipped away at me piece by piece. Your wife just left the house. She's heading towards the highway. She's at the same motel as before, Jim. Room 214. She met up with him again. I got some pictures. Do you want to see them now or wait until I have the full report? I couldn't bring myself to look at the pictures. I told Mark to keep collecting evidence, even though I already knew. Every time I saw his messages, my chest tightened, and I had to fight the urge to call Amy right then and there, to scream at her and demand answers. But I kept it together. I wanted to confront her when I had everything, when there was no way for her to twist the truth. Then one evening, Mark called me. His voice was tense, different from the calm professionalism I'd grown used to. Jim, I'm sending you a link to the live feed right now. You need to see this. I nearly dropped the phone in my rush to get to my computer. My hands were trembling as I clicked the link he'd sent. It opened to a grainy video feed, showing the exterior of the same motel. Mark's car was parked across the street, the camera focused on the entrance. My heart was pounding as I watched Amy's car pull up to the lot. She got out, glancing around nervously. And then, a few seconds later, Jeremy stepped out of the motel entrance, walking straight towards her. They didn't even hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face in his shoulder. I could feel my whole world shattering as I watched her cling to him, like he was her lifeline. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a quick peck on the cheek or some platonic hug. It was a long, slow kiss, the kind of kiss she used to give me when we were younger, when we were in love. Something inside me snapped. I sat there, staring at the screen, watching my wife, the mother of my children, kiss another man like it was the most natural thing in the world. The anger, the pain, the humiliation, they all mixed together into something I couldn't even describe. I felt my face heat up, my vision narrowing until all I could see was that grainy video feed. I could see her hands clutching his shoulders, the way she leaned into him. She had never looked at me like that in months. I clenched my fist so tight my knuckles turned white, resisting the urge to punch the desk in front of me. I knew if I let go of this fragile control, I'd do something I couldn't take back. Instead, I forced myself to watch them disappear into the motel room, hand in hand, like some lovesick couple. Mark was still on the line. Jim, I'm sorry, man. I know this is rough. Do you want me to stop the feed? No. I croaked out, my throat dry. Keep it running. I need this. I need to know. I stayed glued to the screen, my eyes never leaving the door to room 214. Minutes passed like hours. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I didn't want to imagine what they were doing in there. I didn't want to think about what Amy was giving him that she hadn't given me in so long. But I couldn't help it. My mind spiraled out of control, throwing up images I couldn't shake. Then, after what felt like an eternity, they came back out. Amy's hair was a mess, and she looked flushed, her face glowing in a way I hadn't seen in months. Jeremy was smiling down at her, his hand resting casually on the small of her back, like he had every right to be there. They looked happy. The sight of them like that felt like another punch to the gut. Jim, Mark's voice broke through the haze of rage, clouding my mind. What do you want to do now? I've got enough evidence. I can send you the full report with pictures, the works. You don't have to watch this anymore. Send it, I whispered, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. I need it all. Okay, he said quietly. I'll send it by the end of the day. Hang in there, man. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, watching the screen long after Amy and Jeremy had driven away, my mind a tangled mess of thoughts and emotions. There it was, undeniable proof that she was cheating, that she had chosen someone else over me, over our family. Now, there was no turning back. Later that night, After the kids were asleep and Amy was working in her office, I sat down in the living room and pulled up Mark's report. There were dozens of photos. Pictures of Amy and Jeremy meeting up at cafes, walking down the street together, laughing and leaning close. And then there were the motel photos. Each one felt like a dagger in my chest, twisting deeper with every click of the mouse. But it was the last few pictures that broke me. Mark had managed to capture them coming out of the motel room, their bodies close, Amy's head resting on Jeremy's shoulder. And in the final picture, Jeremy was looking down at her with such tenderness, such love, that it made me want to scream. She was my wife. That look was supposed to be for me and me alone. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed the laptop shut and buried my face in my hands. My shoulders shook with silent sobs, my body trembling with a mix of rage and grief. How had it come to this? What had I done to deserve this? I had given her everything, my time, my love, my support, and she had thrown it all away for this guy. For some smooth-talking life coach who probably filled her head with fantasies of a perfect life. By the time I managed to pull myself together, it was past midnight. The house was quiet. The only sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I needed to confront her again. I needed to hear her say it, to see her face when I showed her the pictures. I needed her to admit that it wasn't just emotional, that they had crossed every line imaginable. But when I walked into her office, I hesitated. She was sitting there at her desk, typing away, looking so normal, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just spent the afternoon with another man. Her face was calm, her posture relaxed. I stood there in the doorway, staring at her, feeling like I was in some sort of twisted nightmare. Jim, she glanced up, her brow furrowing in confusion. What are you doing up? It's late. I took a deep breath, feeling the anger bubbling up again. We need to talk. Now, she sighed, pushing her laptop away and crossing her arms. What is it this time? Are we doing this again? Haven't we had enough of these arguments? Who is Jeremy? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes darting to the door like she was considering bolting. But then she took a deep breath and looked back at me, her expression hardening. I told you he's an old friend. Why are you still bringing this up? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening Mark's report and scrolling to one of the motel pictures. I turned the screen towards her, watching her face as she realized what she was looking at. Is this what you do with your old friends, Amy? I asked quietly, my voice trembling with barely controlled rage. Sneak around behind my back, kiss them, sleep with them in cheap motels? For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her mouth hanging open. Then she shook her head, her expression crumbling into something that looked almost like panic. Jim, I can explain. Explain, I spat, taking a step forward. Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That you've been sneaking around with this guy, telling me it was just some life coaching? Do you think I'm stupid? She recoiled as if I'd slapped her, her eyes wide with shock. No. Jim, please, just listen. Don't, I growled, holding up a hand to stop her. I don't want to hear any more lies, Amy. You've lied to me enough. Jim, please, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. It's not what you think. Yes, I lied, but it wasn't just about him. It was about me. I felt so lost, and Jeremy was just a convenient excuse to do whatever you wanted. I cut her off, my voice shaking. Was he just a way to fill some void I couldn't? Did you ever think about what this would do to our family, to the kids? I was confused, she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't know what I wanted, and he was there, and I turned away, unable to look at her. The pain was too much, too raw. I needed space. I needed to get out of that room before I said something I couldn't take back. Pack your things, I said, my voice hollow. I want you out by tomorrow morning. Jim, no, she sobbed, reaching out to grab my arm, but I pulled away. Please, let's talk about this. Don't throw everything away over one mistake. One mistake. I whirled around, my face inches from hers. This wasn't a mistake, Amy. It was a choice. You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. And now, I'm choosing to walk away. I turned on my heel and left the room, her sobs echoing behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't, because if I did, I knew I'd break. I didn't sleep at all that night. The house felt suffocating, filled with memories of a life that no longer felt like my own. I kept hearing Amy's voice in my head, her sobs replaying over and over. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to find some way to make sense of all of this. But the betrayal was too deep. Every time I thought about her with Jeremy, the lies, the secrets, I felt that same rage bubbling up inside me, threatening to overwhelm everything else. The next morning, I woke up early and went downstairs. Amy was already there, sitting on the couch with a suitcase next to her. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen. I could tell she hadn't slept either. I packed some things, she said quietly, her voice hoarse. I'll go stay with my sister for a while. Until we figure things out. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Good. There was a long, painful silence. I could see her struggling to find the right words, but I didn't have the energy to listen to more excuses or apologies. I just wanted this to be over. Jim, I know I've hurt you, she began, her voice trembling. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I want you to know that I still love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I didn't know what I was doing. I lost myself somewhere along the way, and I'm so sorry. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Love. After everything she'd done, she still had the nerve to say she loved me? I don't know what you expect me to say, Amy, I said quietly. I can't even look at you right now without seeing him. I can't think about us without feeling like a fool. So if you love me, then give me space. Let me figure out if there's anything left to save. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Okay, I'll give you space. I'll wait as long as it takes, Jim. I don't want to give up on us. There was nothing left to say. I watched as she picked up her suitcase and walked towards the front door. She hesitated for a moment, looking back at me one last time. But I kept my gaze on the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. I heard the door click shut behind her, and then I was alone, completely and utterly alone. The days that followed were a blur. Amy moved in with her sister, and we arranged a schedule for the kids. I kept things as normal as possible for their sake, even though I felt like I was just going through the motions. Every time I dropped them off at Amy's sister's place, she'd try to talk to me, but I'd keep the conversations short and focused on the kids. I wasn't ready to have a real conversation. I wasn't sure I'd ever be. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to feel the anger slowly fade. It didn't go away completely, but it dulled, making room for other emotions, sadness, grief, regret. I realized that while Amy's betrayal had shattered me, it hadn't completely destroyed me. I was still standing, still functioning, and the kids still needed me. Eventually, I agreed to go to counseling with her. I wasn't doing it to fix our marriage, not at first. I was doing it to find closure, to make sense of how we'd gone from being a loving family to this. I needed to understand what went wrong for my own sanity. The sessions were brutal. Amy was honest, sometimes painfully so. She talked about feeling neglected, about how the loneliness crept in while I was at work, and how Jeremy had offered her something she'd been missing. She admitted to falling in love with the idea of him. The freedom, the excitement. But she swore up and down that it hadn't been worth it, that she'd regretted it the moment she saw how it was tearing our family apart. I just wanted to feel like myself again, she whispered in one session, her voice breaking. But instead, I lost myself even more. And now I've lost you. 2. I didn't respond. I didn't know how. I understood her words, but they didn't change what she'd done. They didn't make the pain go away. We went through months of counseling. Slowly, I found myself opening up more, sharing the anger and heartbreak I'd bottled up. The therapist helped me see that I wasn't to blame for Amy's choices, but I also had to face some hard truths about myself. I had been distant, wrapped up in work, blind to the warning signs. I hadn't been there for her in the way I thought I had. That didn't excuse her betrayal, but it helped me understand that maybe, just maybe, there was a sliver of hope left for us. After a lot of soul-searching, I finally agreed to a trial separation instead of a divorce. I wasn't ready to end things completely, not yet. We both needed time to heal, to see if we could rebuild something from the ashes of what we used to have. The kids were confused, but we tried our best to explain that we were still a family, no matter what. It wasn't easy, but they adjusted. I found myself spending more time with them, cherishing every moment in a way I hadn't before. I realized that no matter what happened between me and Amy, they would always be my anchor. As for Amy and Jeremy, it ended shortly after our confrontation. She broke things off, saying she needed to focus on her family and herself. He tried to convince her to stay, but she finally saw through his charm. She told me she hadn't spoken to him in months, and I believed her. I could see the pain and regret in her eyes whenever she mentioned his name. So where are we now? We're still separated, taking things day by day. I don't know if we'll ever get back to what we had, or if we'll even stay together in the long run. But I'm learning to let go of the anger, to focus on what's best for me and the kids. Maybe one day I'll be able to fully forgive her. Maybe not. If there's one piece of advice I can give to anyone reading this, it's this. Trust your instincts, but don't act out of anger or heartbreak. Gather the facts, take a step back, and think about what you really want. The truth is painful, but sometimes it's the only way to move forward. As for me, I'm still figuring that out. But I'm hopeful that, no matter what happens, I'll come out stronger on the other side.